When Allied troops crossed the Rhine in early 1945, they weren't just chasing a collapsing enemy. They were chasing science itself. Hidden deep in the shattered remnants of the Third Reich were machines that seemed to belong to another century. Rocket-powered interceptors, pilotless flying bombs, and aircraft capable of near-supersonic speeds. The British called it the greatest technological scavenger hunt in history. From the very beginning of the war, Nazi Germany had invested enormous resources in experimental aviation. The Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, the world's first operational rocket-powered fighter, could climb faster than any Allied aircraft, reaching 30,000 feet in less than 2 minutes. The V-1 Buzz bomb carried an 850-kilogram warhead across the English Channel at 640 kilometers per hour, while the V-2 rocket became the first man-made object to reach the edge of space, striking London at 3 times the speed of sound. For the Allies, who still relied largely on piston-engine fighters and conventional bombers, these weapons were a terrifying glimpse into the future of warfare. By mid-1944, intelligence reports were flooding London and Washington, warning of new types of jet aircraft and long-range rockets under development. Churchill's scientific advisor, Lord Charwell, described them as the most significant technological leap since gunpowder. As the Allies advanced through France and into Germany, secret teams were formed to seize this technology before it could be destroyed or fall into Soviet hands. The British created Operation Surgeon, a program to capture Luftwaffe jet aircraft, personnel, and research data. The Americans initiated Operation Lusty for Luftwaffe secret technology, commanded by Colonel Harold Watson, whose Watson's Whizzers would scour airfields across Germany searching for anything that flew faster than sound. At the same time, the Soviets launched Operation Oso Aviakim, which would later forcibly relocate more than 2,000 German scientists and engineers to work in the USSR. The race wasn't about ideology, it was about physics, propulsion, and power. Whoever mastered these German technologies would dominate the post-war world. The Allies knew that the Germans had been testing these advanced weapons at secret bases like Peenemünde on the Baltic coast and Rechlin Luftwaffe Test Center near Berlin. Peenemünde was where Wernher von Braun's team had launched the first successful V-2 in October 1942. Rechlin, on the other hand, was where pilots like Hanna Reich and Heinrich Dittmar had flown the Me-163 Comet and Me-262 Schwalbe, pushing aviation into a new era of jet and rocket propulsion. When Allied reconnaissance discovered the scale of these projects, the urgency skyrocketed. In August 1943, the British Royal Air Force launched Operation Hydra, a massive bombing raid on Peenemünde that destroyed laboratories, workshops, and living quarters for the rocket engineers. But it was too late. The knowledge had already spread across Germany. Dozens of V-2 prototypes were hidden underground in the Mittelwerk tunnels near Nordhausen, while Me-262 jet fighters were being assembled in dispersed facilities such as Oberammergau and Lechfeld. By March 1945, American and British intelligence units began intercepting reports of Luftwaffe test pilots preparing to destroy prototypes to prevent capture. General Eisenhower issued direct orders to secure any and all aircraft of new and unusual type. The Allies deployed special scientific intelligence teams, including the T-Force units, tasked with storming laboratories, hangars, and research institutes immediately after combat troops cleared the area. As German resistance crumbled, Allied soldiers stumbled upon extraordinary sights: sleek, tailless aircraft, fuselages painted with experimental coatings, and stacks of blueprints labeled Strahltriebwerk, jet engine. At Lechfeld Airfield, American troops discovered operational Me-262 jet fighters ready for flight. At Nordhausen, they found a mountain of partially assembled V-2 rockets, along with hundreds of dead forced laborers who had built them under inhuman conditions. What began as a military conquest was rapidly turning into an unprecedented technological treasure hunt. Engineers and pilots were questioned on the spot. Some volunteered in exchange for safety. Others were captured with little understanding of how valuable their knowledge would become. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, thousands of crates filled with documents, aircraft parts, and engines were already being shipped to Allied testing grounds. What no one yet realized was that these discoveries would ignite a new kind of war, one not fought with armies, but with engineers and scientists. The race for the Reich's technological secrets was over. The race for the future had just begun. In the final weeks of the war, Allied intelligence officers had one priority above all others: secure Germany's jet and rocket aircraft before they vanished. Every day counted. The Me-262 and Me-163 represented a leap of a full decade ahead of anything the Allies had built. If the Soviets reached them first, the balance of post-war power could shift overnight. On April 29, 1945, units of the U.S. 9th Armored Division rolled into the Lechfeld Air Base near Augsburg. What they found stunned them. Rows of Messerschmitt Me-262A, 1A Schwalbe jet fighters, some intact, some burned, others ready for takeoff. Nearby lay blueprints, spare Jumo 004 engines, and experimental radar units. Colonel Harold E. Watson, commander of the American Watson's Wizards technical team, immediately ordered the site sealed. Within hours, his men had identified 13 airworthy jets, along with test reports describing speeds over 870 kilometers per hour, 540 miles per hour, unheard of for piston fighters. Each Me-262 was a marvel and a mystery. Powered by two Junkers Jumo 004 turbojets producing 1,980 pounds of thrust each, the aircraft could outrun every Allied interceptor. But it was fragile. Its engines lasted barely 25 hours of flight before failure. Still, it was revolutionary, the world's first operational jet fighter. The same week, farther north near Husum, British forces discovered an even stranger machine, the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, the rocket-powered interceptor that had terrorized Allied bomber crews in 1944. Designed by Alexander Lippisch and tested at Rechlin, the Comet used a volatile mix of hydrogen peroxide, T-Stoff, and hydrazine hydrate, C-Stoff, as propellant, reaching 960 kilometers per hour, 596 miles per hour, in climb. Its speed was unmatched, but it carried only 7 minutes of fuel. After that, it glided home, defenseless. British engineers from the Air Ministry's Technical Intelligence Branch loaded the surviving Comets onto transport trucks and shipped them to Farnborough's Royal Aircraft Establishment, RA. The Americans did the same, sending Me-262s and Comets to Cherbourg, then across the Atlantic under Operation Lusty for testing at Wright Field, Ohio. By June 1945, a dozen captured Me-262s were flying under U.S. markings, each assigned to an Allied pilot with the rare nerve to fly them. Among them was Major Fred Burkhals, one of the first Americans to test fly a jet. His logbook entry from June 8 reads simply: acceleration unbelievable. Controls light at 500 miles per hour. Landing gear weak. Worth every risk. At Farnborough, Captain Eric Winkle Brown, the Royal Navy's most experienced test pilot, became the first Briton to fly both the Me-163 and Me-262. Brown later wrote that the Me-262 felt like stepping 10 years into the future, while the Comet was half aircraft, half rocket, and entirely lethal. He noted that a single fuel spill could dissolve human flesh within seconds, a warning that grounded several Comets permanently. The Allied engineers were methodical. They dismantled every captured jet, documenting each component. Metallurgists studied turbine blades for signs of heat fatigue. Aerodynamicists at RAE placed entire wings in wind tunnels. American technicians reverse-engineered the Jumo 004's axial flow compressor, the foundation for what would later power early U.S. jet engines like the General Electric J-35. Meanwhile, intelligence officers compiled lists of surviving German engineers. Many were located near Munich and Stuttgart, hiding in civilian clothes. Those who agreed to cooperate were quietly relocated under Operation Paperclip, a secret U.S. initiative to bring top scientists to America before the Soviets could recruit them. Among them were propulsion specialists from Messerschmitt and BMW's jet division. The Me-262 data quickly reshaped Allied aviation programs. Boeing and Lockheed engineers studying the aircraft's swept-wing design realized that it offered improved performance at high subsonic speeds. By 1946, this knowledge influenced prototypes like the Bell X-1, the first aircraft to break the sound barrier, and the Gloster Meteor F.4, Britain's first operational jet fighter. The Me-163 contributed differently. Its rocket technology became the seed for high-altitude research. American engineers at White Sands Proving Ground used captured Walter HWK-109 to 509 rocket engines for experiments in vertical takeoff and early guided missile control. Though dangerous, these tests bridged the gap between aviation and rocketry. What fascinated the Allies most wasn't just the technology, but the mindset behind it. The Germans had pursued extreme innovation under wartime desperation, designing aircraft that sacrificed safety for speed and endurance for performance. To Allied planners, this revealed both a genius and a flaw. Germany's scientists could build miracles, but they had run out of time, fuel, and stable production. By late 1945, dozens of Me-262s and Comets were flying in Allied markings, filmed for training reels and engineering reports. The Luftwaffe insignia had been painted over with U.S. stars and British roundels, but their legacy remained unmistakable. Each flight offered a glimpse of a future in which jet and rocket power would rule the skies. The war had ended, but the lessons of the Reich's jets were only beginning to take off. When Allied troops entered northern Germany in April 1945, they were walking into the birthplace of the world's first modern missile program. Buried deep beneath forests and mountains lay the machines that had terrorized London, the V-1 flying bomb and the V-2 ballistic missile. To the Allies, these were more than weapons of terror, they were blueprints for the next century of warfare. The V-1, known to British civilians as the Buzz bomb, was a pilotless aircraft powered by a pulse jet engine, capable of flying 240 kilometers, 150 miles, at 640 kilometers per hour. Over 9,500 of them had been launched between June 1944 and March 1945, killing nearly 6,000 people in Britain. The V-2, meanwhile, was something else entirely, a liquid-fueled rocket that could reach 90 kilometers in altitude and strike targets 320 kilometers away. It was the first man-made object to reach space and return to Earth at supersonic speed. In May 1945, a special Allied unit called the Rocket Development Section, led by British Major Robert Staver and American Colonel Holger Toftoy, arrived at the ruins of Peenemünde, the German Army's secret test site on the Baltic coast. What they found astonished them. Most of the equipment had been evacuated months earlier, but in underground bunkers, they discovered fragments of guidance systems, engine components, and fuel pumps labeled A4, the internal name for the V-2. The British immediately launched Operation Backfire, a plan to reassemble captured V-2 components and test-fire the rockets themselves. Engineers from the Royal Engineers and the Ministry of Supply collected parts from factories in Nordhausen, Bleischerode, and Mittelwerk, where thousands of forced laborers had died assembling the rockets in horrific conditions. The discovery of these tunnels shocked even hardened soldiers, an industrial hell that revealed the human cost behind Germany's miracle weapons. By October 1945, British and German technicians under supervision of the Royal Artillery had completed 3 V-2 rockets. On October 2, 1945, at a coastal site near Cuxhaven, the first Allied-launched V-2 took flight. Witnesses reported the missile rising silently at first, then vanishing into the clouds with a thunderous roar. For the first time, the Western Allies truly understood what the V-2 was capable of and what it meant for the future. Across the Atlantic, the Americans were pursuing an even larger effort. Under Operation Paperclip, Toftoy and Staver secretly arranged for over 100 German rocket specialists, including Wernher von Braun and Arthur Rudolph, to surrender to U.S. forces rather than the Soviets. These men, along with hundreds of tons of equipment, were transported to Fort Bliss, Texas, and White Sands Proving Ground, New Mexico. There, the U.S. Army reassembled and launched over 60 captured V-2 rockets between 1946 and 1952. Each flight carried scientific instruments to measure temperature, pressure, and radiation at high altitudes, data that laid the foundation for space research. The V-2's gyroscopic guidance and propulsion systems became direct precursors to America's Redstone and Atlas rockets, which would later power both nuclear missiles and the Mercury space program. Meanwhile, the Soviets were not far behind. Their own scientific teams, aided by captured German engineers, reassembled the remnants of Peenemünde at a new site near Kaliningrad, launching copies of the V-2 under the name R-1. By 1948, both superpowers had turned Hitler's terror weapon into the seed of the Cold War arms race. The V-1 program also had unexpected influence. British and American engineers studying the weapon's simple yet effective pulse jet discovered its potential for cheap, high-speed target drones. Within 2 years, the U.S. Navy had developed the Loon missile, an almost direct copy of the V-1, later evolving into the Regulus and cruise missile programs. What began as Nazi vengeance had become the birth of modern rocketry. Allied scientists realized they were no longer studying weapons of war. They were studying the future of flight itself. By 1946, the ruins of Peenemünde were silent, but its legacy echoed across both hemispheres. The V-2 had proven that space was reachable, that a machine could cross the atmosphere and return. For the first time, humanity had glimpsed a new battlefield, one that stretched beyond the sky. The Allies had won the war, but the technology they captured ensured that peace would never be simple again. When the guns fell silent in May 1945, the Allies discovered that victory on the battlefield was only half the war. The other half was being fought in laboratories, airfields, and secret bunkers scattered across the collapsing Reich. The question was simple: who would control Germany's scientific genius, the West or the Soviets? The first to act were the British. In June 1945, the Air Ministry launched Operation Surgeon, a covert mission designed to locate, interrogate, and, if necessary, forcibly relocate Germany's top aviation and rocket scientists to the United Kingdom. The objective was clear: prevent them from falling into Soviet hands and secure their knowledge for Britain's post-war air defense. Teams of RAF intelligence officers swept through occupied zones, visiting sites like Oberammergau, Göttingen, and Augsburg. Their targets included aerodynamicists, jet engine designers, and guidance specialists, men who had once worked under Messerschmitt, Heinkel, and Junkers. Every scientist was classified as either Category A, immediate recruitment, Category B, potential threat, or Category C, non-essential. Among the most valuable captures were Dr. Hans von Ohain, co-inventor of the jet engine, and Helmut Walther, whose hydrogen peroxide research had powered both the Me-163 and German torpedoes. They were quietly relocated to RAE Farnborough, where British engineers questioned them for months, often under strict secrecy. Some were treated as guests, others as prisoners under polite guard. At the same time, across the Atlantic, the U.S. Army Air Forces had begun Operation Lusty, Luftwaffe's secret technology. Led by Colonel Harold Watson, the same officer who had secured the Me-262s at Lechfeld. Lusty's mission was to seize all advanced German aircraft, documents, and personnel that could be transported. American teams followed the front lines, often arriving just hours ahead of Soviet troops. The two missions overlapped, sometimes uneasily. At Lechfeld and Oberammergau, American and British officers argued over who had the right to claim certain engineers. In one instance, a group of BMW jet specialists was literally divided between trucks, half sent to England, half to the U.S. The competition was quiet but ruthless. By late 1945, the Americans had moved over 1,600 German scientists and engineers under the top-secret Operation Paperclip. Many of them had worked on the V-2, guided missiles, or jet propulsion. Officially, they were interviewed for intelligence purposes. In reality, they were being absorbed into the U.S. defense establishment. Among them was Wernher von Braun, the 33-year-old mastermind behind the V-2. Captured by U.S. forces in Bavaria, he and his team were transported first to Fort Bliss, then to White Sands Proving Ground. There, they began launching captured V-2s under American colors, forming the nucleus of what would become NASA just over a decade later. The Soviets, realizing the scale of their loss, responded with Operation Oso Aviakim in October 1946, kidnapping over 2,200 German scientists and their families from the Soviet occupation zone. Entire research facilities were dismantled and shipped east. Many of these engineers would later contribute to the R-7 rocket, which launched Sputnik in 1957. By 1947, a new kind of Cold War was emerging, not one of ideology, but of engineering. The Allies were no longer fighting over territory. They were fighting over knowledge. Each captured blueprint, each test report from Piemont or Rechlin could mean the difference between global dominance and irrelevance. At Farnborough, British test pilots flew German aircraft repainted in RAF roundels. At Wright Field, American engineers disassembled Me-262s and Ta-183 jet prototypes. Both nations were mining the same treasure chest, sometimes without realizing it. The irony was not lost on those who had fought against Germany. The same engineers who had designed weapons meant to destroy London and New York were now being paid by those cities to design the next generation of defense. Morality gave way to necessity. The future belonged to whoever learned fastest. By 1948, the British effort had faded under budget pressure, but the Americans pressed on. Their captured scientists were producing tangible results: jet fighters, guided missiles, and the first long-range rockets. Operation Surgeon had achieved its goal of denial, but Operation Paperclip had achieved something greater: transformation. The war for the German mind was over. The United States had won it. And from that victory, the next global conflict, the Cold War of technology, was born. By 1946, hangars in both the United States and Britain were filled with captured German aircraft. To Allied engineers, these machines were not relics. They were roadmaps. Every bolt, every turbine blade, every aerodynamic curve was a lesson in how the future of air combat would look. What had begun as the desperate innovation of a collapsing Reich was now shaping the post-war world's first generation of jet-powered air forces. At Wright Field in Ohio, the heart of the U.S. Army Air Force's Research Division, engineers began methodically reverse engineering the Jumo 004 and BMW 003 jet engines recovered from Me-262s. These engines were crude by American standards, built with low-grade steel, designed to last only 25 flight hours, but their concepts were revolutionary. The axial flow compressor and annular combustion chamber designs were unlike anything in Allied service. American engine specialists quickly realized that, despite its flaws, the Jumo 004 represented the future of jet propulsion. The immediate result of this study was the refinement of the General Electric J-35 turbojet, which powered the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. Although development had started before Germany's defeat, post-war tests with the Me-262 validated many aerodynamic features: thin swept wings, tricycle landing gear, and the need for clean airflow through the intakes. By 1947, the U.S. had dozens of shooting stars flying in squadron service, their design lineage unmistakably influenced by German engineering. In Britain, similar progress unfolded. Engineers at RAE Farnborough and Gloucester Aircraft examined the Me-262 and Heinkel He-162 Volksjager. The He-162's small, lightweight design, built from wood and pressed metal, fascinated British designers looking for rapid mass production methods. The lessons from its compact jet engine installation and fuselage aerodynamics contributed to the Gloucester Meteor F.4 and later the de Havilland Vampire, both critical stepping stones towards supersonic flight. But the greatest revelation came not from what Germany built, but from what it almost built. Among the thousands of blueprints seized by the Allies were designs for aircraft far ahead of their time. The Messerschmitt P.1101, a jet with variable wing sweep; the Ta-183 Huckbein, a high-speed interceptor with swept wings that eerily resembled the later MiG-15; and the DFS-346, a rocket-powered research aircraft designed for near-supersonic speeds. None had flown before the war ended, but their aerodynamic theories proved groundbreaking. American engineers at Bell Aircraft were especially captivated by these unfinished projects. Working alongside captured German data, they designed the Bell X-1, the rocket plane that would later break the sound barrier in 1947 with Chuck Yeager at the controls. The X-1's fuselage, shaped like a .50 caliber bullet, borrowed directly from swept-wing research pioneered at Piemont and Göttingen. Without German data on transonic airflow, Yeager's flight might have been years away. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy studied the Me-163's rocket propulsion to understand high-performance takeoff dynamics and climb rates. The dangerous T-STOF/C-STOF fuels were discarded, But the control principles inspired experimental aircraft like the Douglas D-558-2 Skyrocket, later used to test Mach 2 flight. The Me-163's lessons in fuel instability and pilot safety also accelerated research into more stable propellants, an essential step toward both jet reliability and early spaceflight. At the same time, British researchers under Operation Hydra used data from captured V-1 guidance systems to perfect automatic flight stabilization and autopilot technology. These principles would eventually feed into radar-controlled interception and the earliest surface-to-air missiles. By 1948, the results of these combined efforts were visible across Western airfields. Squadrons of jet fighters, Lockheed P-80s, Gloucester Meteors, and de Havilland Vampires, were patrolling the skies of the emerging Cold War. The Allies had not only absorbed German technology, they had refined it, industrialized it, and outpaced it in just 3 years. Yet, beneath the triumph was a quiet recognition. Without the desperate genius of Nazi science, post-war aviation might have evolved decades slower. The very machines designed to destroy Allied bombers had become the foundation of Allied air power. By 1946, Allied engineers were no longer just studying captured German weapons, they were applying them. What began as curiosity about how the V-1 and V-2 worked soon evolved into a determined effort to transform Nazi rocketry into the foundation of Western missile defense. The V-2's guidance system was the key. Deep inside captured bunkers at Bleicherode and Mittelwerk, Allied teams discovered gyroscopic stabilizers, graphite vanes, and servo-actuated fins that had allowed the V-2 to correct its course in mid-flight. To 1940s engineers, this was revolutionary, a fully automated, self-steering rocket. The British Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough and the U.S. Army Ordnance Corps at White Sands both began replicating these systems almost immediately. At Farnborough, scientists from the Ministry of Supply formed the Guided Projectile Division, using German data to develop Britain's first guided missile. Project Lopgap, liquid oxygen, petrol-guided anti-aircraft projectile. Though crude and unreliable, Lopgap introduced control principles copied directly from the V-2's gyroscopic platform. Within a year, it evolved into the Breakmine missile, the prototype for later systems like Bloodhound and Thunderbird, which would defend Britain throughout the Cold War. In the United States, the same technology gave birth to Project Hermes, managed by General Electric under Army supervision. Beginning in 1946, German engineers under Operation Paperclip worked side by side with American specialists to assemble V-2 components and experiment with new fuels, warheads, and guidance systems. The Hermes A-1 and A-2 were direct descendants of the V-2, incorporating improved radar and gyroscope control. These missiles became the test beds for the Nike and Redstone series that would later form America's first defensive missile network. The Allies also learned from German failures. The V-1's pulse-jet engine, though simple, had revealed valuable lessons about low-cost propulsion and automatic flight. U.S. Navy engineers adapted the concept into the JB-2 Loon, essentially an American V-1 copy, which they used for testing ship-based launch systems. These trials paved the way for early cruise missile designs and radar-guided drones. At Piedmont, captured German documents contained theoretical studies on supersonic airflow, high-altitude trajectories, and wingless glider missiles. These became critical references for both American and British research into hypersonic vehicles during the 1950s. What had been blueprints of desperation were now strategic gold. The influence of captured scientists was undeniable. Wernher von Braun's team at White Sands conducted dozens of V-2 test launches between 1946 and 1951, each one refining trajectory control and fuel efficiency. The same engineers later developed the Redstone missile, the first American rocket capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, British physicist R.A. Smith and German engineer Helmut Habermann collaborated on radar command guidance systems derived from V-2 tracking data. Their work directly led to Green Mace, a radar-guided anti-aircraft gun project, and laid groundwork for later guided missiles like Bloodhound Mk.I. By the late 1940s, one pattern was clear. The Allies had not merely captured German weapons, they had captured time. Decades of theoretical research had been compressed into a few years of applied development. The rocket that once rained terror on London now launched weather instruments, satellites, and eventually astronauts. Yet the legacy was complex. Many of the breakthroughs came from scientists who had once worked under the Nazi war machine. Operation Paperclip's secrecy shielded their pasts, allowing figures like von Braun and Rudolph to rise to prominence in America's space and missile programs. Britain, less forgiving, quietly phased out its German recruits after extracting what knowledge they needed. Still, both nations owed their early missile successes to the same source, Piedmont. The V-2's DNA could be traced through nearly every Western rocket of the 1950s, from the Nike Ajax to the Atlas ICBM. By 1950, the Allies had achieved what Germany could only dream of, turning vengeance into defense. The rockets that once symbolized destruction had become tools of deterrence, setting the stage for a new kind of war, one fought not in the skies of Europe, but in the stratosphere. In the dying days of the Third Reich, as cities burned and armies collapsed, a small group of German engineers was working on something that defied imagination: aircraft capable of flying faster than sound. Hidden in research papers, wind tunnel models, and abandoned laboratories was the blueprint for the jet age to come. The Allies, once they understood what they had captured, realized they were holding the keys to a new dimension of flight. The story began with the Deutsche Versuchsanstalt für Luftfahrt, DVL, and Aerodynamische Versuchsanstalt Göttingen, AVA, Germany's leading aerodynamic centers. By 1944, both institutions were studying swept wings, shockwave behavior, and air compression at transonic speeds. Their data was decades ahead of any Allied research. One German report, later found by U.S. forces at Volkenrode, concluded that airflow over a swept wing delays the onset of compressibility drag, a principle that would define every supersonic aircraft ever built. When Allied intelligence teams entered Göttingen in May 1945, they were stunned to find hundreds of technical documents untouched by looters. The Americans seized everything: drawings, test data, even half-finished models, and shipped them to Wright Field under Operation Lusty. The British, conducting Operation Surgeon, took what they could before the Soviets arrived. It was a scientific arms race as fierce as any fought with weapons. Among the captured plans were prototypes like the Messerschmitt P.1101, a jet with adjustable wing sweep, the Focke-Wulf Tu-183 Huckbein, designed for near-supersonic interception, and the DFS-346, a rocket-powered research glider capable of Mach 2 in theory. None had been completed, but their aerodynamic calculations were meticulous. The Allies immediately recognized their potential. At Bell Aircraft in New York, a young engineer named Robert Stanley studied these blueprints alongside American data on transonic flight. The result was the Bell X-1, a rocket plane built purely to break the sound barrier. Its fuselage, streamlined like a bullet, borrowed heavily from swept-wing data recovered at Göttingen and Piedmont. When Chuck Yeager flew the X-1 past Mach 1.06 on October 14, 1947, he unknowingly validated years of German research captured 2 years earlier. Meanwhile, at Britain's RAE Farnborough, engineers were testing scale models based on Tu-183 and P.1101 designs. Their findings directly influenced the Supermarine Swift and Hawker Hunter, the RAF's first-generation transonic fighters. British scientists also adopted German boundary layer control methods, tiny air holes across the wing surface that reduced drag and improved lift at high speeds. The Americans pushed further. Bell, Douglas, and North American engineers combined German swept-wing data with homegrown rocket technology to create the X-series of experimental aircraft. The X-2 reached Mach 3 in 1956, while the X-15, influenced by Piedmont's high-altitude flight studies, would eventually touch the edge of space. Each step was built on data once hidden in German wind tunnels. At the NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, precursor to NASA, captured German scientists such as Adolf Busemann. The man who first proposed swept wings in 1935 played key roles. Busemann's ideas, once ignored by the Luftwaffe, became central to America's supersonic research. His collaboration with American physicists at Langley Field produced the first reliable equations for shockwave formation and pressure distribution at transonic speeds. Even the failures taught lessons. The Me-163 comet's instability during high-speed climbs offered insight into control reversal and compressibility effects. Test pilots at Wright Field simulated comet flight profiles to design control systems that would remain stable through Mach 1. By the early 1950s, the results were visible. The US F-86 Sabre and the Soviet MiG-15, both shaped by Ta-183 data, faced each other over Korea in the world's first jet-versus-jet battles. The aerodynamic discoveries from Göttingen had reshaped global air combat in less than 5 years. The irony was inescapable. The same research meant to secure Nazi air superiority had instead propelled the democracies of the world into the stratosphere. From wind tunnel sketches to roaring rocket planes, the transformation was complete. By 1945, the Allies understood that controlling the air required more than faster jets or powerful rockets. It demanded information. Germany had invested heavily in advanced electronics, radar, and guidance systems, often paired with the V-1, V-2, and jet aircraft programs. Capturing these systems offered a strategic edge that could define the post-war balance of power. In the Ruhr and along the North Sea coast, Allied reconnaissance teams discovered intact Würzburg and Freya radar arrays, used to detect incoming bombers. The Würzburg was a 3-meter parabolic dish capable of tracking aircraft with remarkable precision, while Freya arrays provided early warning over distances up to 120 kilometers. British and American engineers immediately dismantled the systems for study. The British transported Würzburg units to RAF Malvern and later Farnborough, while the Americans shipped components to MIT Radiation Laboratory and Watertown Arsenal. There, scientists analyzed German pulse modulation, parabolic reflectors, and the emerging concept of electronic filtering. This work revealed that Germany had developed radar capable of not only detection but guidance, a revelation that would influence Allied anti-aircraft artillery and guided missile systems. Captured documents also included operational manuals for the FUG-203ZY guidance systems used on the V-2. These gyroscope-based circuits allowed rockets to maintain course autonomously, a capability previously thought impossible. Engineers at White Sands Proving Ground meticulously reconstructed these circuits, integrating lessons into early American missile guidance projects. The result was the foundation for the Hermes A-1 and later the Redstone missiles' precision controls. Meanwhile, the British focused on adapting German radar technology for anti-aircraft defense. Using data from Peenemünde and Flensburg, RAF engineers designed the Green Mace and Bloodhound missile programs. They incorporated German tracking algorithms, servo-controlled fins, and semi-active radar homing principles. By 1948, Britain had fielded its first guided surface-to-air system capable of intercepting high-speed targets, a direct legacy of captured Reich electronics. Even aircraft avionics benefited. Me-262s and Heinkel He-162 jets recovered from airfields revealed compact radar altimeters, autopilot gyros, and simple yet effective fire control computers. American engineers examined these instruments to improve bomber navigation and targeting systems for the post-war B-29 and B-50 fleets. Lessons learned accelerated the development of automated bombing systems and electronic countermeasures, effectively leapfrogging a decade of research. Electronic warfare also drew directly from German experiments. Allied teams studied Liechtenstein radar used in night fighters, as well as Neptune and Berlin systems, which employed frequency-modulated signals to detect Allied bombers. These studies informed jamming techniques and the development of ECM pods for American and British aircraft. By 1947, electronic countermeasures were standard in high-altitude bombing operations, giving the Allies an unprecedented tactical advantage. Additionally, captured German engineers contributed expertise in remote guidance. Specialists who had worked on radio-controlled V-1 variants assisted Allied teams in understanding signal propagation, frequency stability, and antenna design. Their input directly influenced the creation of early drones, target missiles, and remotely piloted systems, bridging the gap between guided weapons and modern UAVs. By the end of 1948, Allied forces had integrated German electronics into every level of military operations, from early warning radar networks to guided missiles and aircraft avionics. The captured technology was not simply replicated, it was improved, standardized, and mass-produced. Britain and the United States had gained a decisive advantage in both defense and aerospace engineering. The irony was undeniable. The tools once designed to destroy Allied cities now safeguarded them. Peenemann's innovations, radar, guidance, and electronic control, had become a cornerstone of Western military power. Germany's technological genius, once a threat, had been transformed into the foundation for Cold War superiority. The silent lesson was clear. In modern warfare, speed and firepower mattered, but intelligence, electronics, and precision mattered even more. And the Allies had captured the blueprint for all three. By the late 1940s, the Allies had transformed captured German missile technology into more than weapons. They had created the foundation for space exploration. The V-2 rocket, once a tool of terror over London, became the proving ground for America's first ballistic missiles and the early steps into the cosmos. Across the Atlantic, Soviet engineers were undertaking the same transformation with their own captured scientists. In the United States, Operation Paperclip had delivered Wernher von Braun and his team to Fort Bliss, Texas, in 1945. The Germans immediately began reconstructing V-2 rockets using parts shipped from captured factories and Peenemann stockpiles. These launches were not intended as military strikes. Instead, they were experiments to gather high-altitude data, test guidance systems, and refine liquid fuel rocketry. Each successful flight offered invaluable insight into propulsion, structural integrity, and trajectory control. By 1946, test launches at White Sands Proving Ground routinely exceeded altitudes of 80 kilometers. The V-2's gyroscopic guidance system, originally designed for wartime bombardment, became a template for automated missile control. Engineers experimented with improved fuel mixtures, stabilizing fins, and staging concepts that would later inform the Redstone and Atlas rockets. The Mercury Redstone program, which propelled America's first astronauts into suborbital flight in 1961, owed its lineage directly to these captured German designs and expertise. Meanwhile, in the Soviet zone, captured V-2 components and German engineers were instrumental in establishing the R-1 program, the USSR's first domestically produced ballistic missile. Led by engineers who had been brought east under Operation Osoaviakim, the Soviets reconstructed V-2 technology to produce a reliable short-range missile capable of carrying conventional warheads. By 1948, the R-1 successfully duplicated the V-2's range and altitude performance, effectively leapfrogging years of indigenous development. Both superpowers were also learning from failure. Many V-2 launches ended in explosions due to unstable fuel mixtures or faulty guidance. These lessons, meticulously recorded, accelerated the evolution of rocket engineering. Engineers discovered how to control liquid oxygen and ethanol mixtures, prevent combustion instability, and refine nozzle design for maximum thrust efficiency. Every misfire became a classroom, teaching engineers the limits of materials, fuels, and aerodynamics. Captured German data on the Me-262 and Me-163 jets also influenced early American rocket planes. Rocket-assisted aircraft like the Bell X-1 incorporated lessons from the Comet's high-speed aerodynamics, while structural analysis of swept-wing designs from Ta-183 prototypes informed stability control at near-supersonic velocities. These innovations created a bridge from high-speed military flight to suborbital spaceflight, combining propulsion, aerodynamics, and guidance into a unified field. By 1950, the results were clear. The Allies had converted German terror weapons into instruments of exploration. White Sands became a proving ground not for destruction, but for measurement, observation, and eventual space launch. In 1952, the first U.S. V-2 sounding rocket carried scientific instruments into the upper atmosphere, measuring cosmic rays, temperature, and air pressure at altitudes previously unreachable by manned aircraft. The Soviets followed suit. The R-1 led directly to the R-2 V-2 and eventually the R-7 Semyorka, which launched Sputnik 1 in 1957. Engineers who had once designed V-2s for bombardment now calculated trajectories for satellites, proving that technology intended to kill could also carry humanity into space. The irony was profound. Weapons designed for mass destruction had become the launchpads for human ambition. Von Braun later reflected that without access to V-2 data and captured scientists, the Mercury program would have been delayed by years. Similarly, Soviet engineers acknowledged that the R-1 and R-2 programs would have required far more time and experimentation without German expertise. By the early 1960s, the first astronauts and satellites orbited above Earth, their flight paths dictated by lessons learned from the darkest days of the war. The same rockets that once rained terror now lifted humanity toward the stars, marking a complete transformation of purpose. Germany's vengeance had ended, but its technology had forged the path to a new frontier. The V-2 had fired the first shots not only at cities but at the universe itself. By the early 1950s, the full impact of captured German technology was visible across multiple domains of Allied military and scientific advancement. What had begun as a frantic scavenger hunt in the ruins of Germany had matured into the foundation of modern aviation, guided missiles, early warning systems, and space exploration. The lessons learned from the Me-262, Me-163, and Tu-183 jets were evident in every Western Air Force. The United States had operational jet fighters such as the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star and North American F-86 Sabre, while Britain fielded the Gloster Meteor and Hawker Hunter. Swept-wing designs, transonic aerodynamics, and rocket-assisted takeoff systems, all first tested in German prototypes, became standard. These jets transformed air combat doctrine, emphasizing speed, altitude, and radar-guided interception over traditional dogfighting. Captured German rocketry left an even broader imprint. The V-1 and V-2 programs provided unparalleled insight into propulsion, guidance, and fuel technology. U.S. programs like Hermes, Redstone, and Atlas owed their very existence to this legacy, while Soviet projects like the R-1 and R-7 Semyorka formed the backbone of the Eastern Bloc's early ballistic and space programs. The first satellites, the first suborbital human flights, and even early intercontinental missiles all trace their origins back to Piemont and Mittelwerk. In a remarkable twist, weapons of terror became tools of exploration, and the edge of space became the new battlefield. Allied radar and electronics advancements were equally transformative. British and American engineers integrated German guidance systems, gyroscopes, and radar circuits into surface-to-air missiles, automated bombers, and early warning networks. The Nike Ajax missile system in the United States, the Bloodhound in Britain, and the emerging network of radar installations were directly influenced by captured FUG and Würzburg designs. These systems laid the groundwork for the Cold War's first generation of integrated air defense, providing nations with the means to detect and intercept threats faster than any human pilot could react. Operation Paperclip and Operation Surgeon had more than technological outcomes. They shifted the geography of scientific expertise. German engineers, once designers of weapons of war, became architects of the Western aerospace and defense industries. Figures like Wernher von Braun and Hans von Ohain shaped American rocketry and jet propulsion, while British collaborations with captured scientists accelerated radar and missile programs. Knowledge, once a tool of destruction, became a strategic asset of unprecedented value. The geopolitical consequences were immediate. By the early 1950s, the United States and Britain possessed air forces and missile programs that dwarfed any remaining German capability. The Soviet Union, working with its own captured engineers, had achieved parity in rocketry and space launch. The Cold War, in part, was being waged not only with ideologies and armies, but with the genius of scientists who had once been under the Nazi regime. The race for space, intercontinental missiles, and advanced air superiority owed its starting line to the rubble of Germany. Perhaps the most striking lesson was the transformation of purpose. The same technologies that could obliterate cities were reimagined for exploration, deterrence, and national security. Allied pilots, engineers, and scientists proved that even instruments of war could become instruments of progress if captured, studied, and applied with vision. By 1955, the new era was unmistakable. Jet fighters patrolled the skies at Mach 0.9. Missiles could strike targets hundreds of kilometers away with precision, and the first rockets were pushing humanity toward space. The legacy of the Reich's secret programs, once a symbol of devastation, had become a cornerstone of technological and scientific advancement for the next half-century. The story of captured German technology is, therefore, not only one of war, but of transformation. The weapons of the Third Reich shaped the Allies' victories long after the war ended, defining the early contours of the Cold War and opening the door to spaceflight. From Me-262s to V-2 rockets, from radar arrays to experimental jets, the knowledge seized from Germany became the launchpad for a future that no one in 1945 could have fully imagined. In the end, the war had ended, but the race for the sky, and beyond, was only just beginning. The captured genius of a defeated nation had rewritten the future.